and we talk about contemporary issues and trending issues and hear from them that what do they feel about each of these issues that are surrounding them today and what is the voice of the youth. Today, I think, this is one of the topics that has grabbed the imagination of the entire world. If I may say so, this is probably one of the biggest scams that has hit our worldwide, on a worldwide level, where we have discovered offshore havens, hidden riches of world leaders and billionaires. And there has been so much that has been exposed in an unprecedented leak. The Pandora Papers reveal the inner workings of a shadow economy that benefits the wealthy and well-connected at the expense of everyone else. Millions of leaked documents and the biggest journalism partnership in history have uncovered financial secrets of 35 current and former world leaders, more than 330 politicians and public officials in 91 countries and territories, and a global lineup of fugitives, con artists, and murderers. So we're going to be talking about this, understanding from my bright, energetic panel that has joined me today, that what was their perspective when they read about the Pandora Papers leaks. So before we jump right into the issue, let me introduce this illustrious panel joining me today. We have Neil Jawar, who's joining us from the Lakshmipad Singhania Academy, and we have Koiki Manning joining us from the Singapore Intercultural School, Indonesia. So without further ado, let's jump straight right into this conversation. All the people who are joining me, all my viewers, you know the drill already. Any questions that you have, please make sure you're sending it to us on our social media platforms as well as this platform. We're going to be picking up those questions and integrating those in our conversation with this panel today. So first things first, what were your initial reactions, if I were to say, when you read about the Pandora Papers? So Koigi, if you could start with you.
Yeah, sure. I'll start off. So the reveal of the Pandora Papers is followed by, I believe, two other reveals in the most recent years, because you had one with the Swiss banks as well. And I feel like the reveal has been once again similar in response. Because when the other papers were first introduced, you have this whole controversial of oh my gosh, this is what our leaders are doing. They're avoiding tax, and then after a few years, it kind of dies down. And I feel like this might be another one of those papers, and this is exactly the problem why I feel we should take this one seriously, because it even exposes some of the current politicians, and when I read them, I was pretty much dumbfounded, because we all knew things were happening in the background, but no one actually had proof. And when proof finally comes out, it's quite satisfying to know that your politicians have been corrupt and you know they're corrupt, but it actually turns out they're corrupt. But at the same time, there's a tingling feeling inside of me that says, this is really not right. Especially with some of the government officials in Pakistan, I believe, they were exposed. And that made my stomach churn, because it's absolutely disgusting, just what they're doing.
Absolutely. I think, Koiki, a lot of people who are joining us today on this discussion and who are going to be viewing this later will totally resonate the sentiments that you have echoed today. Neil, if we could hear from you, I mean, firstly, what was your reaction? Was it similar to Koiki? Also, for the uninitiated here, if you could just, give them a little bit of an introduction to the Pandora Papers leaks.
I totally agree. There were many names there which actually had me surprised. And now what the Pandora Papers are, they're actually leaked files, and 12 million, that is, from many corporates and service firms, which have telling about around 30,000 off-shelf companies and private trusts. And what they are doing is they're revealing the rich and famous people who have already been on the radar of investigative agencies. So that does, like Koiki mentioned, it does make us a sense of satisfaction that we knew that these people were corrupt, but this reveal has been satisfying to many people. The purpose for which trusts are set are many, and some may be genuine too, but a scrutiny of these papers have shown that what their true objective is. One is to hide their real identities and distance themselves from these offshore entities, so it becomes almost impossible for people to trace it back to them. And The second is to safeguard their investments, be it cash or real estate, from creditors and law enforcement agencies. So, what this paper does is obviously very important, and much like the previous Panama Papers, uh, these are exposing many politicians and known personalities. Uh, that's all. I have to say.
Thank you so much, Neil. So I think you're absolutely right when you pointed out that this is definitely a step in the right direction for us, because while we knew that a lot of these things are happening, these nefarious activities have been going on in the background. I mean, this was the much needed evidence trail that we needed to sort of lead us to this. This brings me to my question to my third panelist joining me today, Arzu. So, Arzu, at the heart of this issue today lies the problem of, if I may say so, the tax havens and how they are being misused by wealthy individuals and, by these extremely influential people. Now, this is a very unique problem, which is very cross border in nature. So, how do you think that we should be how should everyone come together, and how do we ensure that we are not creating a future like any situation like this in the future where tax havens are being misused? I mean, what are your solutions that come immediately to your mind?
First of all, ensuring that is not going to be an easy job, because most of the people who are involved in the Pandora Papers are actually world leaders, presidents, and even state people in all the things. So those are the people who actually enforce the laws. Those are the people who have the hold over all this legal action. So since we are dependent on them for legal issues, it's kind of out of the way to expect them to do something. So I guess we as citizens, what we can do is, like, for example, whenever something goes really wrong in the parliament or such a law is enforced which isn't catering to much of our needs and it's an unlawful act, then most people come together, they organize rallies, create awareness among people, and they sort of pressurize the parliament to withdraw its statement. So I guess the same thing should be done here, because we cannot expect the same people whose names arrived in the paper to take action against that. So I guess that is one thing we all could unite and do. Once again, that's dependent on the population itself. So if you're willing to do it, that's gonna take a great step towards this.
Totally agree with you there, Arzu. Quickly, if we can bring you in, that what were your thoughts on this aspect, that how do we tackle the issue of tax havens? How do we, come up with cross-border laws where we can actually avoid a situation like this arising in the future?
Yeah, no, this is a very interesting topic you bring up there, because it's been a topic of debate for years now, and I think only recently they've begun to try and reinforce some sort of global tax minimum in which countries have to coincide, and they have to adapt to a certain tax policy. But what Arzu mentioned was yeah, I think the main problem that has come out of the Pandora Papers is that our governments need governing. And I think that's a very strong irony, and just shows how even in countries where you feel, oh, there's no way first world countries are corrupt, when it's like, no, they are just as corrupt as other countries. And I come from a background in Indonesia, and corruption is everywhere. It's rampant. It's really bad here. And I've always had this idea that first world countries such as the US or the UK, they should have their tax policies sorted out. And this is one of the big realizations, that no, they're just as screwed as everyone else. And I think the first way in order to get rid of or solve this problem is not just the policies of the tax havens, which we're going to go into a bit later, I believe, right? We're going to talk about how we can regulate tax rates in amongst countries. But I think the main problem here that has become so concerning is that how are we supposed to regulate the governing bodies that govern us, right? These are bodies that we expect them to be clean, we expect them to not be corrupt, but it just shows. I mean, it's a pretty difficult thing.
Correct. I totally agree there with you, Koiki. I mean, it's really the question of how do we govern the government? And that really lies at the heart of it. I think another pressing issue that came out was, the misuse of these offshore companies and these shell companies that were being misused by these personalities to hide their wealth. Now, this is an issue that's also plagued our nation as well. So, how do we go around, resolving this, and how do we ensure that we are not creating these kind of conduits where there can be a lot of, illegal wealth that is being parked? So, Neil, if we could, hear from you on this, that what do you think on, on a level, on your level, that you think, that we should be doing, probably countries come together and doing, or there's some sort of, regulation? What should it be like?
So, of course, this problem isn't going away very soon because many countries are involved in this. And the way to remove this is by many countries coming together. And many of the most powerful nations should come together so they can end tax havens. This can be done by reducing pushing the percentage of global minimum tax rate more. So like around 15 or 20%, which will eventually eliminate such tax havens. The new minimum tax rate would apply to companies with more money, and this would help increase the total tax revenue of the whole world, not just by some countries. So mainly this increase of the tax rate should be the main point here.
Right. I think, thank you so much, Neil, for that response. Arzu, I would like your response also on the question of the offshore companies. And along with that, I mean, I think all three of you in some form of the other in your responses are talking about the fact that how we need some kind of regulations, how we need some kind of laws to be able to tackle with this. But also we need to bear in mind that these are not domestic situations, but here you would have to create an international law of some nature, which is going to govern a couple of nations. So firstly, I'd like to know from you, what is your view on the issue of the offshore companies that are being used as conduits? Second, I'd like to know that, how do you think, what kind of laws must countries have, to regulate these sort of nefarious activities that are happening, and how do we enforce it on a global stage? Over to you, Arzu.
So one thing I would like to say is the best way to deal with this is to make an international organization. Like we have the United Nations that caters to the defense mechanism. I guess there should be one such international body where all the countries agree, sign a treaty, and that enforces all the laws. So since it's an independent international body, it can easily enforce such laws, and its main sole motive is to enforce laws. So I guess one of the steps that could be taken is this. And answering to your second question, I guess, yes, it is going to be a difficult job. So the main attraction that the people have towards the tax havens is that the tax over there is minimum or really low. So I guess one thing that could be done is all the countries that are set, all the organizations or companies that are set up in tax havens, exceeding a minimum amount of startup investment, may say, like for example, exceeding $1 million of investment. Maybe the original country, for example, I am setting up a country in, say, British Islands. So then India should take some amount of tax from me because my startup investment in that area in the British Islands is too much. It's exceeding 1 million. So I am liable to give some amount of my revenue or some amount of tax to the Indian government as well. So if the Indian government ensures such thing, or in that matter, even if that international body organizes all this in such a way, then this could be reduced in quite a substantial form.
Thank you so much, Arzu, for that very well thought of response. Koike, let me take this question to you because I really think this is the center of our conversation today. That, like Arzu said, she's proposing that we should have an international body that must be formed like the United Nations, which is kind of governing these kind of financial transactions that are happening on a cross-border jurisdiction manner. So what do you think? Is that the solution to this problem? How do you see it? Would you like to, if you agree with it, would you like to add some more finer points to that?
Now here's the thing that I picked up. I agree. I believe, yes, we should definitely have some sort of body to regulate this, but at the same time, I believe this might just be another distraction, because the more layers you put onto something, the more complex it becomes and the harder it becomes to regulate it. And so by adding another layer above the governing bodies, it would, in a sense, you'd say, like, what's going to stop people above that from exploiting their power as well? I think the main problem that needs to be addressed is the lack of transparency with in terms such as in finances, in businesses, because a lot of businesses, they lack the transparency, and governing bodies lack the ability to get businesses to be transparent with their tax rates and their tax returns. One of the biggest things recently is how Trump has never released his tax returns yet, right? Because there's a long-standing debate of Donald Trump not releasing his tax returns. And even though the US government has multiple times requested him to release them, he still has not. And so I think this is just one of the other problems with the lack of transparency. And in order to dwell deeper into the problem, in order to fix the problem, we need to attack its roots. And the roots need to be, how are we going to regulate businesses and make sure that they're paying this equal tax rates, right? Because I think solving the problem by getting every country to have equal tax rates is temporary, right? I think the main problem is getting businesses themselves to pay their taxes and pay their and pay their dues. Now, what I believe would be a proper solution would be to get businesses to file regular tax returns, right? So you have this transparency, and if you prevent businesses from creating offshore accounts in the first place, that might perhaps limit or take away some of the dangers of having offshore accounts and the exploitation of offshore accounts.
Thank you so much, Koiki. I think that's a very interesting, and I think that's a very good, insightful response and accurate analysis of this issue today. So, Neil, we have, a couple of solutions that have been thrown in. One is where Koiki is mentioning the fact that we should attack the root cause of the problem, which is, the lack of transparency of corporations, of, big business houses, which can be addressed even at a domestic level. Arzu is very rightly pointing out that we should have an international body that is sort of regulating the financial transactions between these countries, that's happening between individuals of different nationalities in other countries. What about you? What do you think? I mean, we'd like to hear from you that what is it that you feel is going to be the solution in terms of law and law enforcement to tackle this problem today?
I have to partly disagree with Kolki, because I think it's right to go after the root cause, which is transparency. But without a unified international organization like the UN, as Arzu said, I don't think we'll properly be able to implement that. Because without it, we'll have to take the support of all the offshore country governments, financial institutions, and that just complicates things more. So, like the UN has been doing so well for so long and everything goes through them, I think there should be such a uniform body that controls such things. And only then we'll be able to make it more transparent and remove this problem altogether.
Correct. I think that's also a correct perspective on the issue. I mean, one of the things also I think that we probably, there's not been much of public debate about is the fact that how this entire, I'd say the leak, the entire uncovering of these leaked documents has been the work of numerous journalist organizations. As we all know that when these kind of I'd say, scams that get revealed at a global level, one of the biggest issues that we face today is that how do we maintain the safety of the journalists who have actually been a part of uncovering this truth? How do we ensure that we are maintaining their anonymity, which is very, very important today? So I would like to hear from the three of you that what is it that we can do today to protect the identity of these journalists who have worked really, really hard to uncover this entire scam to us today. So let's start with Arzu. Arzu, your opinion on this?
So there's one catch in this problem. In case we grant laws saying that journalists have the right to be anonymous, then there's one problem that we face here where we cannot give 100% guarantee that all of the journalists working out there are loyal to their profession. So many people and many journalists can misuse those laws also. Like, for example, journalists are quite associated with, say, presidents or higher authorities. So what if they're getting bribes from them to stay anonymous and not reveal the secrets of those high officials? So I guess laws on that matter should be carefully planned so that no sort of loopholes could be created and the journalist shouldn't get an unfair advantage of misusing the profession as a whole.
Right. So I think that's a fair concern to be raised, which is with regards to anonymity, which is going to hit the authenticity and veracity of the news. Koiki, let's come to you. What do you think about this? That, on the question of maintaining the identity, protecting the identity of journalists and maintaining anonymity, how should we be going about this issue today? Because, obviously the safety of journalists is also key in this issue.
Yeah, well, here's my thoughts today. My 2 cents are that on one hand, yes, we need to protect the anonymity of journalists, but at the same time, if we maintain journalists to be anonymous, how are we supposed to believe them, and on what level is the work that they put out or the exposés that they put out going to be believable to the masses, and how is it going to affect how the general public views these papers? Because obviously putting out papers exposing your leaders who a general population trusts to be able to keep them safe is not necessarily the easiest thing. It's sort of like if I put out a paper on a certain family member of yours, criticizing what they're doing in the background, and you as part of their family, you'll be like, no, this is not true. This is not the person that I know. And so by keeping it anonymous, on one hand, you're keeping the journalists safe, but how believable do these papers and these exposés become? But another aspect is if we are to seek out the truth, there is some form of there's obviously some form of risk. And I have my hats out to all the journalists who put their life on the line for this. And one way they could navigate this or sort of stay anonymous while still staying a bit believable is to release the papers under an organization, which the Pandora Papers have. I think it's the ICIJ is what they're called, and they released it under the organization name of ICIJ. And I think this is absolutely brilliant because not only does it keep your journalists safe, but whatever reputation your journalists have will reflect on the organization itself. And so the organization itself would become believable, but the key players would still stay anonymous. But of course, this is another problem because the Pandora Papers were exposing anonymity. And so this is the problem. If people aren't transparent, if no one is transparent, then problems arise. And so I think this is a bigger problem as a whole. What do you think about it, Neil?
So I agree with the point of an organization representing the reporters, but it does have some problems too, because the Panama Papers were also released in such a manner, but they did have a large share of death threats and suspicious killings and murders. This Pandora Papers investigation is even larger, having upwards of 600 journalists, I think. The right of journalists not to disclose their source is not a privilege, and I think it should be taken as a fundamental right to have whoever engages in such activities where they can be criticized for the fulfillment of press freedom. Now, yes, as Arzu mentioned, the fear that this right would be used in a wrong way can never really be eliminated for any right, to be honest. And it is an inescapable element of any fundamental right, any from freedom of speech to this. The right of journalists not to disclose their sources, will safeguard them and their autonomy by protecting the fruitfulness of the whole democratic process of dissemination of information to the public. So I think, yes, the right of anonymity is very important for journalists.
Great. So I think we have a very balanced opinion there. So we have arguments that are coming from both the fronts. So I think we've given a very balanced perspective to our viewers. Now, before I end this conversation today, I think one question that I definitely, and I'm sure this is something that also came up on our social media platforms quite a bit, was that this expose exposed close to 35 global political leaders. Now, the question really is that what are the steps? Like, we have controversies that happen, then we're talking about it for a week, we're talking about these leaders for a week, and then everything dies down. But the question really is that, we should not let it die down, because this is an expose that is really exposing some of the most powerful people and the kind of malpractices that they are engaging in on a financial level. And more importantly, this is also like one of the responses that we started with, that really it's about, the people who we vest our trust in to govern us properly, who are today, engaging in these sort of malpractices. So as citizens, what should we do? What is the sort of action that must be taken so that, we are actually making sure that this is not another controversy that just boils for a week and then after that, completely loses traction to, another news that is going to make the headlines. So Arzu, let's start with you, and you could give us your concluding remarks as well.
Okay, this is actually an inevitable problem. It happens almost all of the time. We have a very big issue and then it dies down. There's not much we could do about it, but the best thing is to take action when it's in the hot topic area. So rather than waiting for a long time till the topic dies down, it's better that this period that we have right now, this period should be the active period in which we all should take steps. For example, the setting up of the treaties, the international bodies, or whatever my friend suggested, all those things should be done in this period only, before any such breaking news comes and holds everyone down. So yes, my concluding remarks are, I have literally given a hats off to all those journalists who have done such an applausible job over here. But yet again, we all are very shocked about all of this exposure thing, because I came across this news that I guess the President or Prime Minister of Jordan has maybe 135 million crore dollars invested somewhere in a foreign island, whereas its own country is below poverty. So that's a really shocking news, because that revenue is enough to cater to the needs of its own population. And he's being so disloyal to his own profession that he's investing all of that for himself. So I'm actually taken aback that what will he do for all such wealth, because he cannot spend it for his lifetime. He's going to leave it behind. That could be put in a better use. So yes, I guess it is high time that we take action against this and press the government take action regarding this.
Neil, let's focus the spotlight on you now.
So yes, we need to act immediately, and most importantly, I think we need to hold the governments accountable. Over the last 20 years, political leaders have vowed to eradicate tax havens. They've called shelf companies and money laundering threats to society, democracy, and their ways of life. And they've said that they have passed many laws and agreements, but it's not stopping. Offshore system and tax dodging continues to thrive. Now, when one offshore provider is exposed, others use it as marketing for their own tax havens. These revelations, like Pandora Papers, highlight the fact that these laws will are not alone cannot do much. The government will have to come out with more ideas such as drastic reduction in income tax slabs in corporate taxation and facilitate easy and hassle-free reinvestment of profit in business. Such stuff will eventually uh, not make it necessary for people to find tax havens. And I think that is the main aim of this, to hold them accountable.
Thank you so much, Neil. Koiki, if we could have your concluding remarks and what you think we must do to address the issue of these expose of the world leaders that has happened courtesy the Pandora Papers.
Oh no, in terms of closing remarks, well, I agree with what Neil and Arzu have said. Like, especially what Arzu mentioned is when these leaks, these pieces of news have relevancy, that's when we should take action. And I think that's very important because, especially if you're thinking you're not that involved or your country wasn't mentioned, that's not the point here. The point here is that we as a society, we as the world, we need to get angry. We need to make these politicians or whoever have been exposed, whoever is responsible, take responsibility, because that's our right to ensure that the governing bodies that we have be clean and proper, because that's what we expect of them, right? And so I agree, we need to take hold of this small window of relevancy before it goes away, because it's human characteristic, isn't it? If it doesn't affect us, we tend to not care. And that's the problem, because sometimes things do affect us, but we don't realize it affects us. And so what we need to do is we as a society need to get angry. We need to be mad at these politicians for what they're doing. And we need to get them to take responsibility, because that's our right to make them have responsibility. That's what I think.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I think it's been a wonderful conversation, and it's been so nice to hear all the refreshing views and perspectives that have come from three of you. And that is very much reflected in the feedback also that I have received from the people who are attending the session. So a big pat of the back for each of you for coming very well prepared and coming with opinions that are very well thought of. I hope you guys had fun while we were conversing today, and it gave you new reflections to sort of chew on and go back with food for thought. And the same goes for our audience members. A very big thank you to all of you for joining us on a weekly basis, because this is the kind of encouragement that keeps us going and wanting to come back with more new, unique, and innovative content to you on a weekly basis. So thank you again. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Arzu. Thank you, Koiki. And a big thank you to all our participants for joining us today.